Today we'll be doing post editing like pros, so without wasting time, let's go. Okay, first things first, for those who'd like the raw files used in this project, just hit my DMs and I'll provide them for you for practice use only. Okay, alright. So I'm just going to show you all the assets that it took to come up with this composition. So I'll unhide the layers, all except from the ones I used to color grade, since that's what you're going to do in this project. Yeah, so we are on the city layer. You can see there's some color grading there, so I'll hide that. That's a curves. You're going to see lots of curves in my project, guys. Okay, so you're also going to notice in all my layers there, those two layers always at the top. For those who might be wondering, I use those to sharpen, but I'm going to show you later. So these are the layers I'm talking about. So there's always going to be that layer and that layer. So I use those two to sharpen my images. So we're on the phone layer, that's a curves. Okay, that's a hue and saturation layer. S curve, that's an S curve. Let's skip that layer for now. Yeah, so these are the two layers I'm talking about. There's always these two layers in all my layers, so I use this to sharpen. Well, maybe I can show you the effect they do on the project. So that's before and that's the after. I know most of the creatives, you get your images either from shoots or you buy them from the stock websites. They're high quality, but it doesn't have to go that extra mile. Okay. Yeah, the images always look good until you do some post editing. You'll see the difference. There was also some color. I did change some colors on the lady layer, but I'm going to show you how I did it. Yeah, so you'll see lots of orange in this project. The color grading, I'm doing it towards the shades of orange and purple. This because this project was specifically for Faulo. So even of the Faulo bank, their main colors are orange and purple. So we are going to blend all the layers towards the shades of either orange or purple. Okay. Next, so as I was showing you guys, that's the before and that's the after. You can check her. So the previous color was yellow. So how I did this is basically adding a selective color layer. The color you want to change is the yellow, so you pick the yellows and play around with the values until you settle on what color you're targeting. Okay, yeah, but I'll show you later in the video, guys. I did that on her shades as well. So that's the layer we are going to work on in the video. Yeah, so that's the shades. You can see previously they were yellow, then I changed them to purple. Yellow, this time we changed the values differently from the suit. Yeah, but I'll show you later in the videos, don't worry. So that's a hue and saturation layer. We'll skip, I think that's the bad layer. So the two layers, sharpening always. Then that's the before, that's the after, then curves. Okay. Yeah, so those are the layers. Let's get started. We are on the sky layer. I'm going to work on the sky and land simultaneously. So I didn't like the previous sky, the raw sky. I think it's too cloudy. So I had to crop it out. Always use layer masks just in case I want to go back to the original format. So that's the previous sky, and that's the after cropping it out. Yeah, so as you might have noticed, there's this layer in nearly all the other layers. So this is just a gradient. How I do this is go to adjustments, select gradient, then I picked a shade of purple. Also that's the gradient type. Yeah, so I picked a shade of purple, then changed to radial, then increase the scale until it covers the whole subject. In this case it's the sky. Click OK, then change the blending mode from normal to color. The amount depends on how cinematic you want your project to look, but I never go all the way out, so I just play around with the opacity. I think around that looks just fine for me. Okay, then there's another hue and saturation layer. Since the sky is blue or maybe cyan, I played around with the shades. As you can see, the hue amount was altered. So this the more or less the raw look. So I played around with the hue to give it a more purple shade. So that's before, that's the after. Yup, so that's another curves adjustment layer. So I use this to increase the contrast on the edges on the sky at the top. Okay. Yeah, so next we are going to the city layer. I'm going to show you how we do the sharpening. So we'll just go ahead and delete those layers. So what we do is Control J on the layer, city layer, then drag the copy on top of all the layers, but still within the city group. Then go to brightness and contrast, then show it's clipped, then contrast all the way down. Change the blending, go to click the layer, of the copy, go to filter, other, high pass. So around the point where you can barely see the outlines, click OK, then change the blending mode from normal to linear light. If you want a more cinematic look, just go for vivid light. Okay, so play around with the opacity and never go all the way out. Yeah, so increase the opacity slightly just to bring out all the details and clarity. Okay, so that's a curve. An S curve. So you bring the shadows down slightly, highlights up, but it depends on the layer you're working on. Okay, so I use this curves adjustment layer to increase the highlights on the horizon. That's a saturation. As you can see, I've increased the saturation on the city layer. Okay, so that's the gradient we used on the sky. I just made a copy of it before, that's the after. Alright, so this is a new technique I've never used in any of my previous videos, so I'm just going to guide you on it before and after. I'll just delete it. So how we do this, go to adjustments, click photo filter. Okay, so there are tons of shades to choose from, as you can see, but in this project we want either purple or orange. So that's a blue tint, as you can see. That's also a blue tint. I'm just going to click so you can see the changes. I'll change to yellow. So that's yellow, that's orange, and that's a darker shade of orange. As you increase the amount, you can see the effects. So just play around until you settle on what you think will work just fine. So this gives the layer, the city layer, the sunset vibe sort of, but I never go all out. Yeah, so just play around with the amount. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, on to the next layer. So now we are on the font layer. So that's the before cropping out. As you can see, I took the photo myself, so just crop out the background, increase the highlights on the right side, since that's where the sunset is coming from. That's the hue and saturation layer. In this case, I reduced the saturation. It was too much saturated, so I decreased the saturation. That's an S curve on the phone. Same gradient we used on the land and the sky. I mean the city and the sky, and the sharpening layers. So we'll add the photo filter adjustment layer, same shades of orange, just playing around with the amount. So remember, the photos are taken during different times of the day, so the amount will always be different depending on the layer you're working on. Okay, so I'm going to zoom to the area where the phone sits on the city. So as you can see, I just didn't do a basic straight line when cropping out. I always go along with the contours. Same applies for the shadow, so I'm just going to show you. Yeah, so this is the shadow. As you can see, let me just zoom in. Blending mode is multiply. So when I zoom in, you can see when cropping out, I go along with the contours on the city. I just don't do a basic straight line. This makes your composition look more natural. Okay, remember the blending mode is multiply on shadows, but that depends on the materials and the surfaces you're working on. Okay, so that's I added clouds behind the phone. This to give the perspective, just to show how high the phone is. So always invest in your brushes. I'll just show you briefly. So ensure the foreground color is white, opacity at 100. Then go ahead and pick your brush. As you can see, I have so many brushes installed. Only a few came with the default software, so you'll either have to outsource, get the free brushes out there, or buy. Basically, you just paint around, and that's how you add clouds to your project. Easy, guys. Yeah, so that's the sky. I played around with the opacity. Okay, so on to the next layer. We'll go to, I think it's the lady. Yeah, it's the lady. So just to show you the effect of the sharpness layer, sharpening layers, that's the before, that's the after. You never notice the difference until you try it out. The raw photos you've taken of or downloaded from the stock websites, they look clear, but always do the post-production, guys. Does miracles on your project. So that's some dodge and burn. Okay, that's accounts to bring out the highlights. So basically dodging and burning. Others call it frequency separation. Yeah, then the shoes, since they are white, curves doesn't work well on white, so I used levels, just bringing it to the darker side. So you just bring it to the dark side, play around with the layer mask to bring out, to reveal what you want to affect to the levels. Yeah, so this is the color changing layer on the lady's suit, yellow to orange. So I just played around with the values on the yellow. Okay, remember guys, so when doing this, since it's yellow, some parts of our face are going to be yellow, so always ensure you crop those areas out using on the layer mask. So black conceals, white reveals. Okay, so I'm going to briefly show you how to do this color changing technique. We are going to work on the spectrum, the shades. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and delete. let's do it from scratch. So basically what I do is add a new saturation. No, I mean a selective color layer. Ensure it's clipped to the lady, then go to yellows, play around with the amounts. So even if you don't have the basic color theory knowledge, you can just play around with the values until you find what you want. So as you can see, the adjustments affect other parts of the lady, but we'll fix that later. Yeah, so we have the tint of purple. Just play around with the lightness. Once you've found what you want to settle on, just control I on the layer mask to invert. Ensure the brush tool is selected, soft brush, opacity at 100. Make the brush small. Also ensure the foreground color is white, so press X or D. So ensure white is the foreground color, then just brush over the areas we want to reveal. White reveals, black conceals. Don't worry if you brush outside the shades, you can always change that later. Yeah, so this is the same process I used on the lady suit to change from yellow to orange. Just take your time. Yup. So press X to put black as the foreground color, then brush over the areas you want to get rid of the effect. So at the top there. And that's how we did it, guys. Easy. So I added an overall hue to the lady. So we'll go ahead and add the photo filter. Same shades, just play around with the amount. So for the lady, she was a little bit, the shades are to the orange side, so we didn't add a lot of value to the photo filter. So yeah, that's another clouds layer I added, but this time it's in front of the phone. Okay, next is the bird layer. So the two layers for sharpening, that's the before, that's the after. I'll just zoom in. That's before, that's the after. You can see how it brings out the details, guys. Okay, so that's the same gradient we used on all the other layers. Then curves. That's a hue and saturation layer, and that's the curves. Then I just added an photo filter. Play around with the, since the body is more or less black, the photo filter will not do much of an effect to it. So next I'm going to show you how to do this lens flare. Okay, I've never done it on any of my previous projects, but I'm just going to show you. So basically how we do this is go to filter, then go to render, filter, render, lens flares. As you can see, it brings you a short notice. A pop-up menu shows up, and it tells you the lens flare doesn't work on an empty layer. So what we do, you Control Shift Alt A to take a snapshot of all the layers. So then go ahead, the same process, render lens flare, then pick the type you want, then play around with the opacity. This is just one technique. As you can see, there's a lens flare added, but one disadvantage, you can't actually change the position. So I'm going to show you yet another technique. So create a new empty layer, ensure black is the foreground color, then Alt delete or Command delete on Apple, then go to render lens flare. Okay, choose the type you'd like, play around with the amount. You can also change the positioning, just drag. You can play around, just drag until you find what you want, then click OK. Change the blending mode from normal to screen. Normal to screen. Yeah. So this is the technique to use, because for this you can play around with the position. It's easy to crop out, since you just add a new. Play around with the opacity. I think the amount was too high when selecting the lens flare. So play around with the opacity, and to crop out the outer regions, just create a new layer mask. Ensure soft brush is selected, and black is the foreground color, since we want to conceal. So brush outside, increase the brush size, then brush outside the lens flare to get rid of those bright areas. Yeah, and that's how we add a lens flare to our project, guys. So we'll do an overall color grading, and we'll call it a day. Alright. Okay, next thing we're going to do is the overall color grading. Okay, so just take a snapshot of all the layers, Control Shift Alt A or Control Shift Command E on MacBooks. Go to filter, ensure you convert it to a smart filter in case you'd like to make adjustments afterwards. Then go back to filter, camera raw filter. Okay, so I'll just apply the previous settings I used. Then I'll guide you briefly on how I went around it. I went about it. So that's the before on the left, and that's the after. So we are on the basic color correction. So I just played around with the tint. The opposite of green on the tint slider is purple. So just go towards right slightly. Remember what we do in these camera raw filters, everything is just light. The image already looks good on the left, so we're just making final adjustments. Play around with the hairs, clarity, texture. Just don't go overboard. Yeah, then that's the dehaze. Almost works the same as exposure, but not exactly similar. Then I played around with the saturation. I almost never touch on vibrance. I use saturation a lot, so I just increase the saturation. You might as well increase the details. Sharpening. So when you do sharpening, you don't want to go all the way, just add the value slightly. So this is just another technique you can use to color grade, but this is the final tweaking. Nothing major, or you can as well just keep to the color grading layer. Okay, so this is where the magic happens when finalizing my project. So the highlights, the midtones, I gave them a shade of purple. You don't want to go all the way out, so you first select purple. The purple, well, that's yellow, a shade of yellow. So on the slider, you don't want to go all the way out. The shadows as well, I give it the purple shade. Don't slide too much away from the center, just slightly. Then the highlights as well, I give them the orange shade. So highlights affect the bright areas, shadows affect the darker areas. Always keep that in mind. After that is done, you just click OK, and the whole project is done, guys. And that's it. That's the before, that's the after. You can see the difference, guys. So skipping out on this process, color grading, it's a crime scene, guys. So I hope you've really enjoyed the video. For beginners, keep learning. Most importantly, practice on your projects. In case of any clarifications, just hit my DMs. Make those badass creatives, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, peace.